Okay.
So, Anne and Mary Hewitt suggested in an art student in Munich, which I found in Riaki's book, that women were bestowed on by God qualities just as powerful, or even more so, than what was bestowed on men, in terms of intellect, nature and usefulness. She also suggested that societies had gained silly vows of prejudice created by ignorance. You can see an example of this in Bronte's Villette, as they had the fear of women being affected by the arts. Lucy is described as having an astounding and secular audacity to be a young person who is sat coolly down with the self-possession of a garçon when she is gazing upon a sexualised picture of the Gypsy Queen, whom she describes as butcher's meat. When Lucy is then confronted with paintings categorised as the life of a woman, she is just as unimpressed with these women as she is with the Cleopatra, describing them as grim and grey as burglars and cool and valued as ghosts. Lucy's reaction to the art of drama, on the other hand, is completely different. She displays internal conflict as she wants to indulge emotionally, but is held back by her feminine moral conduct. It was a marvellous sight, a might revelation. It was a spectacle low, horrible, immoral. When Lucy then seeks a male point of view of the actress, we are informed that he judged her as a woman, not an artist. It was a branding judgment. In both cases, we find there is a massive focus on the conduct of the woman rather than the art itself. They become a commodity. Women are then judged for the women they indulge in depicted in the arts they are featured. Similarly, the poetess has the same issue in that she forms part of a structure of representation that both aesthetises and commodifies her. We can see this notion in paintings of Christina Rossetti by her brother Dante. Dante depicts Christina as an emotionless and passive woman in each of these four images. Her hair is tied back sensibly and her clothes appear dull in colour and in style. She represents domesticity, refinement and purity which poetesses were expected to represent in their persons' lives and poetry. However, the image I am most interested in is this one. It is the only painting out of all four where Rossetti is looking at the viewer as if she knows we are gazing upon her. I believe it reveals Rossetti for who she is as a great poet rather than just another feminine aestheticised commodity we can gaze upon. In this portrait, Christina's passivity disappears and the gain of eye contact allows us to thrive in the cliché that we can see into her soul. She appears trapped and frustrated like most women of the time. This ambiguity of her persona, as in how her brother depicts her compared to who she really is reflected in the ambiguity of morals in Goblin Market. Rossetti focuses her narrative in Goblin Market on two sisters, Laura and Lizzie, who both display different characteristics which ultimately determine their fate. This painting by Arthur Rackham portrays the two girls' contrasting personalities. Laura is depicted as the curious female, the one who is not afraid to look. Once again, we return to the idea of gazing at commodities. At this point in Rossetti's poem, Laura concentrates on what the Goblin men have rather than the Goblin men themselves. One holds a basket, one bears a plate, one loves a golden dish. However, what Rackham does is concentrate more on the girls, whilst the image of the Goblin men is very minor, and what they are holding is even vaguer. I feel that if this image was really to depict what Rossetti is narrating, there would be just as much focus on the Goblin men as well as Lizzie and Laura. Thus, Rackham portrays the girls simply as commodities to be gawped at, unlike how Laura is gawping at what the Goblin men have to sell. Lizzie, on the other hand, represents the female who has internal conflict with doing what society perceives as right and wrong for a woman. Just like Lucy in Villette when she's watching the actress, she wants to be a virtuous female and obey the morals of Victorian femininity. Compared to Laura, who's portrayed with tingling cheeks and fingertips, Lizzie appears distressed. She's the only character in the painting who is not taking part in the gazing commodity cycle. She is physically covering her face so she does not look at the Goblin men, but it's also as if she's attempting to hide herself from us, even though we can still see her. It could be suggested, therefore, that regardless of whether Victorian women abide by feminine conduct or not, they will always be looked upon, judged and commodified. Sexual connotations are massive and explicit in Goblin Market. The two images here portray the scene where the Goblin men attempt to force feed Lizzie the fruit, one again by Rackham and the other featured in a Playboy magazine. In Rackham's, we can see that Lizzie has turned her head away from the Goblin men, but her eyes are looking at the Goblin attempting to feed her. She's become slightly curious. This highly contrasts the previous Rackham image discussed where she covers her face. Yet what I find most interesting about this image is the way Lizzie is almost posing as if she's some kind of model. She seems very calm and collective, and she makes no real attempt to hide herself. It is as if while she's showing some curiosity, she wants to be gazed upon and noticed, possibly for a high feminine morality and showing that she's doing the right thing by not eating fruit. Racken's illustration complements nicely the lines like a beacon left alone in a hoary sea. Her white dress stands out from the dark colours behind her like a beacon of light. Being the virtuous sister, she's allegorised by the idea of a beacon leading people the right way to safety. And in a double entendre, the word hoary is a white greyish colour, but also the idea of hoary spelled W-H-O-R-Y in terms of being unchaste. On the other hand, the illustration from the Playboy magazine I feel over-sexualises what is actually happening in the poem. One of the first noticeable aspects about this image, apart from the fact Lizzie is naked, is the use of phallic-shaped fruits trying to be fed to Lizzie. In some ways, it's understandable why the artist has decided to do this. The poem does allude to some form of metaphorical rape, as it is described that the goblins held her hands and squeezed their fruits against her mouth to make her eat. However, I feel that using fruits in this way completely undermines the important theme of Rossetti's poem. At the beginning, when Laura says to Lizzie what fruit she would bring her, all the fruit she describes are spherical. She speaks of plums fresh on their mother twigs, cherries worth getting, figs her teeth have met, melons icy cold, peaches with velvet nap, and pellucid grapes with one seed. The fact that Rossetti describes round fruits rather than phallic-shaped ones is the reason I believe that this poem has nothing really to do with men. Rossetti instead is allegorising throughout the poem the idea of indulgence in the feminine and the consequences of embracing particular aspects of femininity. Understandably, an argument against this reading is that the sexual connotations heighten the relationship between the male goblins and the female maidens. However, the goblins are not simply male, but half man and half animal creatures. Around the same time Rossetti published Goblin Market, Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species. As the idea of evolution became more accepted, thus the idea of God creating the world began to be questioned, fears of degeneration, of individual reversions to a more primitive or even animal level with a large-scale breakdown of civilization proliferated both in general debates and in fictional writings. Thus, Rossetti could be using the goblin men as a metaphor for the more masculine, primitive and animalistic side of women, particularly when it comes to sexuality, rather than simply the rape of a woman, which the Playboy image alludes to explicitly. It cannot be avoided that the language Rossetti uses alludes to lesbian eroticism, partly at the end of the poem, particularly at the end of the poem when Lucy tells Laura to hug me, kiss me and suck my juices. However, what I feel Rossetti highlights more than anything, which her brother's portrait here picks up on, is the power of a sisterly bond rather than simply an incestuous homosexual relationship. What is most noticeable about Dante's illustration is the masculinity of the girls, more so in the case of Laura, her big arms, chiselled jawline and pointy nose. If we then compare this image to Dante's fictional heroine Joan of Arc, we can see there are lots of similarities in the face and hair. It seems that for it to be accepted when women did not behave as Victorian women were supposed to, they are portrayed as more masculine. By depicting Laura as less feminine, eradicates in some way the overtly erotic homosexual relations of Christine's poem. Instead, Dante's illustration concentrates on the bond of sisters which Christina describes at the end of the poem. There is no friend like a sister, to lift one if one totters down, to strengthen whilst one stands. The bond between women is also discussed by Howitt as an outer sisterhood which consists of women, all workers and all striving after pure moral life, but belonging to any profession, any pursuit. All should be bound to help each other in such ways as were most accordant with their natures and characters. Thus, it could be suggested that female friendship and sisterhood was a way to overcome the sexism of the Victorian era, and poetesses like Rossetti wanted to highlight the strength females have collectively. So the close readings I've given you are mostly my opinion and my personal favourites of others. However, there's so many different interpretations, I can't do it all in 10 minutes. However, it is clear to see from what I've shown you that the illustrations for poems have a significant effect on how a poem is received, and the interpretation, reception and illustrations of a poem could change and mould over time as society's idea of the role of women also changes.
Thank you very much, that's lovely. Can I just ask you for the reference about the sisterhood again? Is that from it?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I just ask you as well, could you apply your argument to other illustrations? I know we've done it a bit, and I know you've read around it.
Yeah.
Could you apply it to other kinds of illustrators?
What, from the time or?
From the time.
From the time. We have Tennyson's poem.
Yeah.
It was massive
Which
on
poem are
the...
you talking about? Was it the one we did?
Yeah.
The Lady of Shalott?
That's it, the Lady of Shalott. Yeah, you had the pre-Raphaelites at that time, which Dante Gabriel said he was part of. They did depictions of women in his poem as well, but what I liked about their illustrations there was the fact that they kind of incorporated lots of symbolism in the poem. They didn't just take one image and just depict it how it is, but they also included their own kind of interpretation on it, and it kind of included the poem as a whole rather than just one singular aspect of the poem. I can't remember the name of the artist, which one it was.
It was Waterhouse.
Was it Waterhouse, the one where she's got all the...
Well, actually, Holman Hunt did the most astonishing wedding of that.
Yeah. Is it that one where she's looking at the mirror? And you've got the...
Yeah. Astonishing, yeah. So you can see that this process of objectification and disturbance, you would argue that is displayed in a range of...
Yeah, I mean, even today, like, I mean, that picture from Broadway is from the 1970s.
Yeah.
So even then, it's just as the roles of women have changed, the depictions are completely different. Like, obviously in that picture she was naked. You wouldn't, to have something like that in the Victorian era would have been a lot more, what's the word? You wouldn't expect it, well, you would expect it, but it'd be looked down upon to see a woman in that way, whereas for a Playboy magazine, as I said, like, you kind of expect to have that image in there, but at the same time it changes the meaning of the poem.
Yeah. Okay. That's great, Jay. Thank you ever so much.